Have you ever wondered what the powerful Pharaoh's men, considered children of the sun god, ate at their banquets? Were their meals exquisite and luxurious, filled with the fragrance of herbs and spices? Or, behind that golden curtain, were there dishes that upon hearing of them would make you shudder or even feel nauseated? The truth is sometimes stranger than fiction. In the palaces of ancient Egypt, amidst walls engraved with scenes of victory, amidst feasts overflowing with wine and music, there appeared dishes so bizarre and at times so unbelievably disgusting. It wasn't just grilled fish or honey cakes, but also blocks of rotting cheese, jars of wine mixed with dead bees and slabs of bird, meat salted as hard as a mummy before being grilled and offered to the pharaoh. It's hard to imagine that these kings, draped in shimmering gold and silver robes and seated on carved thrones, could savor dishes reeking of putrid smells. But this very fact reflects a reality. In the world of the ancient Egyptians, cuisine was more than mere sustenance. It was a symbol of power, a bridge to the divine, a testament to wealth, and sometimes a test of courage. Picture this scene. In a great hall blazing with torchlight, the pharaoh sits on his throne, surrounded by a long line of nobles dressed in pure white. Before them, long banquet tables are laden with lotus flowers, goblets of wine, and plates of food. Yet, instead of alluring aromas, the air is thick with a fishy, pungent, and sour stench that would be unbearable for any newcomer. The nobles remain unfazed, lifting pieces of rotten cheese, sipping cloudy honey wine as if it were the most natural thing in the world. For them, to eat such things was to come closer to eternal life, the immortality that all of Egypt craved. What led to such dishes appearing in the royal court? The reason stemmed from two factors: food preservation capabilities and religious beliefs. In the harsh desert heat, meat and fish spoiled quickly. The Egyptians devised methods like salting, fermenting, or burying food in sealed jars. But it was these very methods that created flavors we would find horrendous, but which they considered noble. Furthermore, they believed that the gods favored strong, even putrid, smells thus. The more a banquet stank, the closer it was deemed to be to the divine. That is why these horrifying dishes were served not to the common people, but to the nobility, officials, and the pharaoh himself. Eating them was proof of wealth. Only those with enough power could afford to keep rare foods even after they had rotted. And more than that, it demonstrated reverence for the gods like a sacred culinary ritual. Thus, when we look back, we see a paradox. The higher the status, the stranger the food. While a commoner might eat dry bread and simple salted fish, the nobility feasted on bacteria-filled cheese, bird meat salted until it became rock hard, and honey wine mixed with dead insects. They ate not just to live, but to prove they were different. And that is just the beginning. As we delve deeper into the banquets of the palace, you will shudder at what the ancient Egyptians once considered delicacies. From cheese found in a 3,000-year-old tomb to the raw, liver of sacrificial animals and jars of fermented fish with a smell so horrific it made the air suffocating, all will reveal a little-known aspect of the cuisine of power. From the civilization of the Nile, the foundation of a powerful cuisine. To understand why such bizarre and even disgusting dishes appeared on the banquet tables of the ancient Egyptian elite, we must look at the culinary foundation they built. Egypt was not a land of abundant resources like the Mediterranean or Mesopotamia. The entire civilization depended on the Nile River, the lifeblood of existence. Each year, the Nile's floodwaters would recede, leaving behind a layer of fertile silt that nourished the fields. Thanks to this, the Egyptians could grow wheat, barley, beans, herbs, onions, garlic, and lettuce, the basic ingredients of their daily diet. But for the nobility, these simple things were never enough. They needed extravagant, unique, and distinctive dishes to prove their status. Luxury ingredients in the palace. In ancient reliefs and records, we see the presence of ingredients that common people rarely had the chance to touch. Beef and veal, raised separately on royal farms, served only at banquets. Fattened fowl, geese, ducks, pigeons, and even cranes and storks fattened with grain. Nile fish, perch, catfish, carp, but for the nobility, they weren't simply grilled. Often, the fish was turned into a pungent fermented dish that a commoner would not dare to touch. Honey, a precious sweetener, considered the tears of Ra, used in cakes and wine. Grape and honey wine, a luxury as grapes had to be imported from the Levant region. On the surface, it all seems opulent and powerful. But primitive processing methods, combined with strange religious beliefs, transform them into dishes that make posterity shudder. Cuisine as a religious symbol. In Egyptian culture, eating was deeply connected to faith. It was believed that certain foods could bring strength, longevity, or the approval of the gods. For instance, animal liver and heart were considered the seat of the soul, so they were sometimes eaten raw during rituals. Fermented fish and fowl were seen as food of the gods because their strong odor was believed to call the deities. Honey containing dead bees was not discarded, as it represented the sacrifice of the bees to the sun god. Notably, these dishes were not common among the general populace. A farmer was content with a loaf of dry bread, a few cloves of garlic, and some salted fish. But for the nobility, food had to be both difficult to obtain and difficult to eat to truly reflect their class. The stranger is nobler mentality. A peculiar aspect of the Egyptian elite's culinary thinking was this: the more pungent and unpleasant the food, the more it was considered a delicacy. Perhaps it was precisely because the common person couldn't stand it that eating it became a privilege. For example, cheese buried for years, reeking of a foul stench, was presented on the banquet table like a treasure. Jars of fermented fish with a smell that shot up the nose were poured into small bowls like a rare sauce. There were even types of bread made with flour mixed with sand and grit, which would normally be a sign of carelessness. Yet the nobility ate it without the slightest complaint. Cuisine, a political tool. More than just a means of survival, food in the palace was also political. When a pharaoh hosted a banquet, presenting strange and horrifying dishes served two purposes. 1. To prove wealth. Only the king could afford to keep rare foods, even after they had turned. 2. To test loyalty. Officials and nobles had to eat alongside the king, showing their absolute submission, even if the food made them sick. It can be said that these foundations were the fertile ground from which the most disgusting dishes of ancient Egypt were born. And that is why when excavating ancient tombs, archaeologists have found culinary artifacts that make one shudder just by looking at them. Cheese full of bacteria. Fish fermented into a slime and grape wine mixed with the carcasses of insects. So, what delicacies actually appeared at the royal banquets of ancient Egypt? And why were they considered symbols of power rather than revulsion? The most horrifying delicacies on the pharaoh's banquet table. When one thinks of the banquet tables of ancient Egyptian nobility, many imagine scenes of opulent splendor. Long tables covered in white linen, gleaming jars of grape wine, gold-engraved plates, and artfully arranged dishes. But the reality hides a shocking contrast. Behind that glamorous facade were foods that, if placed before us today, no one would dare to touch. These were the delicacies of power, both disgusting and mysterious, accessible only to the highest echelons of society. Rotting cheese in the tomb, a taste of death. In 2018, while excavating the tomb of Mummies at Saqqara, archaeologists discovered something that sent a shiver down the world's spine. A block of rotting cheese, over 3,000 years old. It no longer had the smooth, creamy white appearance we see today, but had become a grayish-yellow powdery mass, emitting a pungent, sour stench. Chemical analysis revealed that the cheese contained bacteria that caused brucellosis, a disease that killed many ancient Egyptians. Yet, in the lavish context of the royal court, this cheese was considered a precious delicacy. It was not only for eating, but was also placed in terracotta jars and buried with the pharaohs as an offering to the gods. The Egyptians believed that the putrid smell was the flavor of immortality, helping the pharaoh's soul to exist in the afterlife. Imagine a banquet table brightly lit by torches, the pharaoh on his throne, and before him an exquisitely carved golden plate, and on it slices of cheese reeking of the smell of death. The surrounding nobles pick up a piece, their faces solemn, and swallow it slowly as if they were consuming the very soul of the gods. Raw liver and sacrificial organs, a ritual of courage. During solemn sacrificial ceremonies, animals from healthy bulls to fattened geese were brought to the altar. The drums beat relentlessly, and the smoke of incense filled the air. As the knife cut through the animal's body, its warm, still bleeding liver would be pulled out. According to Egyptian beliefs, the liver and heart were the dwelling places of the soul. Therefore, to prove their devotion, priests would bring the raw liver to the banquet table, forcing the pharaoh and certain nobles to take a bite. No one was allowed to show fear. A single frown was tantamount to insulting the gods. Imagine the chilling sensation spreading through your body as a slick, warm, and pungent piece of liver slides down your throat. But for the nobility, this was an oath of loyalty. They didn't eat it because they wanted to. They ate it for fear the gods would abandon them. Rotting fermented fish, the ancestor of fish sauce. One of the most popular dishes in the palace was gessia fermented fish sauce, the ancestor of modern fish sauce. To prepare it, Nile fish were placed in jars, salted, and then left to bake in the sun for weeks. Under the harsh desert heat, the fish would decompose, turning into a slimy mixture with a smell that shot straight to the brain. For us, a single whiff would be enough to induce vomiting. But for the Egyptian elite, gessi was a divine flavor. They would dip bread into this thick liquid, drizzle it over grilled meat, or use it to marinate birds. Some jars of gessi were even buried with the pharaohs as a kind of immortal sauce for them to use in the afterlife. During a royal feast, as the sound of the harp filled the hall, you might have seen nobles sipping wine and nodding, while their hands dipped dry bread into a bowl of stinking gessi, chewing away, their faces as serene as if they were enjoying a fine delicacy. Bread full of sand and stone. A sweet agony. The Egyptians called bread the gift of Osiris. But ironically, the bread of that era was a source of great suffering. Primitive grinding tools meant the fine flour was mixed with sand and grit. When baked, the loaf became a hard, gritty block that crunched in the mouth. What is remarkable is that not only the common people but even the nobility ate this kind of bread. They saw it as a form of offering, eating the very soil and stone of the Nile as a way to connect with the divine. When studying mummies, archaeologists discovered that the teeth of Egyptian nobles were worn down and shattered, a consequence of a lifetime of chewing on bread filled with sand and stone. And yet, at royal banquets, bread was always present. They would soak it in wine, dip it in gessi, or plunge it into honey. And when they bit down, a crunching sound would echo, as if a reminder that such luxury was also filled with pain. Honey wine with dead bees. A goblet for the sun god honey was considered the tears of Ra. From it, the Egyptians brewed a sweet wine served at royal banquets. But upon excavation, ancient wine jars were found to contain not only fermented honey, but also the bodies of dead bees settled at the bottom. This was no accident. The Egyptians believed that bees were sacred creatures, carrying messages from the sun god. When a bee died in the wine, it was a sacrifice. Therefore, they were not filtered out. When a noble raised his goblet, he would inadvertently drink the bee's corpse as well. Imagine, a golden, viscous glass of wine shimmering as the candlelight catches it. But as you bring it to your lips, a tiny bee carcass floats along, touching the tip of your tongue. The noble closes his eyes, swallows it whole, and smiles to him. It is an honor. To us, it is a nightmare. Birds salted like mummies, a dish against death. Birds were a common food in Egyptian cuisine. But in the palace, they didn't eat fresh, delicious birds. They preferred salted birds. Many small birds like pigeons and even storks were gutted, stuffed with salt, and dried out like mummies. They were then grilled to a dark brown, emitting a scorched smell. The Egyptians believed that eating salted bird meat would grant them power against death. A mummified bird was like a person after death immortalized in a salty form. The nobility ate this dish to consume immortality itself. At the banquet, when the desiccated bird was placed on a silver platter, everyone was solemn. Not a word of complaint was uttered, only the dry, cracking sounds of chewing, mingling with the beat of ceremonial drums. Insects and beetles, the power of rebirth. The Egyptians worshipped the scarab beetle as a symbol of rebirth. Therefore, on some special occasions, crushed beetles were mixed into wine or cakes, considered a talisman. You can picture a nobleman holding a glass of wine, the liquid cloudy and laced with tiny black specks. He takes a sip, swallows, his expression unchanging. For them, it was a sacred connection to the gods. But for us, the mere thought is enough to send a chill down our spine. All of these dishes, from rotten cheese, raw liver, and fermented fish to honey wine with dead bees, reflect a strange logic. The more disgusting the cuisine, the more power it represented. For the Egyptian elite, the banquet table was not just for satiating hunger. It was a political ritual, a religious testament, and a way to affirm social status. Their world was lavish and dazzling, but when we looked deeper, it was a haunting world, where even the food carried the stench of death. A tale of two tables, the people and the privileged. The ancient Egyptian royal banquets, with their rotten cheese, raw liver, honey wine with dead bees, and desiccated salted birds, were more than just cuisine, they were symbols of power. But the question arises, what did the common people think when they looked upon these bizarre foods? And why did the nobility regard them as sacred treasures? For the peasant class of Egypt, cuisine was confined to dry bread, salted fish, onions, and garlic. They lived simply, eating to maintain their strength for labor. Therefore, when they heard tales of the horrifying dishes in the king's palace, most felt fear rather than admiration. For instance, the act of the Pharaoh and his officials eating the raw liver of a sacrificial animal was considered extraordinary. The people believed that only those chosen by the gods could swallow the soul of a creature without being cursed. To them, it wasn't a meal, but a magical ritual. Similarly, jars of reeking fermented fish were spoken of in folklore as the food of the gods. Commoners dared not approach, as the putrid smell was thought to carry the breath of the underworld. They were filled with awe and, from a distance, saw the nobility as beings who could consume death itself, proof that they were different, superhuman. In stark contrast to the commoners, the aristocracy viewed these horrifying dishes as a mark of their class. In the palace, anyone who could eat, who dared to swallow such bizarre things, proved themselves worthy of standing near the pharaoh. Eating was no longer just for survival. It was a test of loyalty. When the pharaoh raised his goblet of honey wine mixed with dead bees, all the nobles had to raise theirs in unison. When the pharaoh chewed on a piece of bread crunching with sand and stone, they had to chew as well. Every dry, cracking sound that echoed through the feast was the sound of submission. In a theocratic society where the pharaoh was considered the son of the sun god Ra, eating as he did was synonymous with sharing in his divine nature. No matter how disgusting the food, a noble had to smile and swallow it, because it was a way of proving, we are different from the common people. We are strong enough to eat with the Pharaoh. Ancient Egyptian cuisine was always intertwined with faith. The people believed that rotten cheese symbolized immortality, as it could exist for centuries without disappearing. Raw liver represented the soul. To eat it was to absorb the life force of all living things. Fermented fish carried the flavor of death, but it was also the flavor that guided the soul to the gods. Wine with dead bees was a sacrifice. To drink, it was to drink the power of the sun. Salted birds recreated the human mummification process, helping the eater draw closer to immortality. Thus, a meal was not merely to satisfy the palate, but was a living ritual where every bite was a prayer and every sip of wine was a communion with the divine. The politics of a putrid plate. However, this difference also reflected a deep chasm that divided ancient Egyptian society. While farmers could only eat onions and garlic to get through the day, in the palace, resources were wasted on horrifying dishes. The people might admire power, but in their hearts, suspicion and bitterness also grew. Did the gods truly demand banquets filled with the stench of death? Or was this just a way for the pharaoh and the nobility to assert their absolute separation from their subjects? It is noteworthy that these gruesome dishes became an effective tool of governance. They planted a belief in the minds of the common people. The nobility was different, superhuman, even capable of eating things that ordinary mortals dared not touch. As for the nobles, these meals were invisible shackles. Anyone who wished to maintain their status had to eat, had to obey, had to partake in the gruesome ritual. If not, they would be considered weak and unworthy. It can be said that these bizarre dishes did not just reflect the extravagant tastes of the aristocracy, but were also political and religious tools. They maintained social distance, consolidated the pharaoh's power, and transformed the banquet table into a stage for absolute domination. But after all is said and done, what remains of these horrifying foods? Were they merely to satisfy a fleeting sense of power, or did they leave behind lessons and legacies for posterity to ponder? A legacy in every bite. Throughout our journey back in time, we have witnessed a picture of ancient Egyptian civilization that is both brilliant and haunting. We've seen banquets and palaces where shimmering torchlight illuminated tables laden with gold and silver, yet the food served would make a modern person shudder. Cheese reeking of death, warm raw liver from sacrificial animals, fish fermented into a slimy concoction, bread filled with sand and stone, honey wine with dead bees, desiccated salted birds, and even insects and beetles. What seemed to be mere cuisine turned out to be a political ceremony, a religious instrument, and a symbol of power. The nobility ate to prove their status, to assert their difference from the common folk, to show loyalty to the pharaoh, and to communicate with the gods. Meanwhile, the common people could only watch from afar with a mixture of awe and bewilderment. The ancient Egyptians lived in a society obsessed with death and immortality. From the architecture of the pyramids and the art of mummification to every dish on the banquet table, everything was directed towards one goal: to overcome death and touch eternity. Therefore, eating rotten cheese, a substance that could exist for thousands of years without decomposing, or eating salted birds, a reflection of human mummification, were ways for the nobility to declare, "We hold the secret of immortality." Even if it was only a belief, it was powerful enough to shape an entire civilization. Looking back at the past, we might laugh or shudder. Why would they eat such disgusting things? But then, let us ask ourselves, what will future generations think of us? Today, humans still eat things that other cultures might consider horrifying: pungent durian, blue vein cheese, balut, developing duck embryo, or even fried insects, a dish that is gradually becoming a superfood. Fast food, canned goods, genetically modified foods. Is it possible that, thousands of years from now, posterity will view them as the disgusting dishes of our time? just as we view the rotten cheese of Egypt? Perhaps the answer is yes, because cuisine always reflects its era, and each era, with its own lens, will judge the past in its own way. From the horrifying dishes in the Egyptian palace, we can draw several lessons. Cuisine is not just for survival, it is a tool of power. Those who hold power decide what food is considered noble or disgusting. Belief can transform the disgusting into the sacred. To a commoner, rotten cheese was waste. To a noble, it was the food of immortality. Every culture has its own dark culinary corners. And it is these dark corners that preserve unique legacies, helping us to understand human history more deeply. Today, when we walk into the Cairo Museum or read archaeological reports, we still encounter these culinary artifacts. A block of cheese as hard as a rock, a jar of honey wine with dead bees, a fossilized crock of fermented fish. They lie there, silent, yet they contain an entire story of power, faith, and the thirst for immortality. They remind us that food is not just something to be eaten, but a language through which people tell the story of themselves. And then, as we close our eyes, we cannot help but wonder, if one day, thousands of years from now, posterity were to excavate our kitchens, opening our fast food boxes, instant noodle packets, and soda bottles ... what would they say? Would they consider it the food of a civilized people? Or would they shake their heads and whisper, "These were the disgusting dishes of a lost era"? But is that truly the whole story of ancient Egypt's gruesome eating habits ... Or are there still unearthed secrets lying dormant beneath the golden desert sands?